Hi, Ms. Parati.
Hello.
Good
How
evening.
are you?
I'm well, thank you. Good evening, everyone.
So Deidre, this evening, as you know, we'll be reviewing some questions with you. We'll look forward to an opening statement by you and an introduction also by Mr. Waylett. Is Mr. Waylett in,
He is not.
Steve?
No,
is
he
not.
is
Okay.
not currently in the meeting or in the waiting room.
Okay,
He's
So
coming on at
Deidre-
6:30, right?
Yeah, he does know the order, and he does know
okay.
that the
Oh, okay. That's fine.
interviews will be about 30 minutes apiece, so he may be
Okay.
coming after.
Okay, thank you. So Deidre, it's myself, Mr. Smerridge, Roger Smerridge as the moderator, and of course, Gary Cheeseman as the select board chair and myself. So why don't you just give an overview to the committee and to the public that may be watching about your background and your interest in serving on the Wenham Finance Committee.
Absolutely, thank you. So thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening. Pleased to be applying to be on the FinCom. I have lived in Wenham about 10 years with my family, come to love the town. And I have engaged a couple of times in town government. I was on a superintendent search committee, was my first entry into town government. And then recently, the past year, I served on the 3 to 5 committee, the town government study committee. And I really enjoyed the experience. And I would like to continue to be of service to the town and be engaged in town government. And I do believe that FinCom lends itself well to some of my background and experience. So my career to date has mostly been in higher education, and where I played a role in operations management, leadership and management of a very large department with a substantial research portfolio. So one component of my position over about 20 years was always financial management and budget, as well as oversight of the grant portfolio, a large research grant portfolio that consisted of some very significant grants from both the US federal government as well as foreign governments. Our group was a global health group. So we worked all over the world, primarily Africa and Asia. So we had research contracts from the US, from foundations, from overseas governments, overseas agencies. So I had oversight of that entire world, basically, financial oversight and compliance. So ensuring that all of the funds were expended appropriately according to budget, and as well as following all the relevant rules and regulations of each donor, of each country that we worked in, and certainly of the US federal government. So that's a world that I'm very familiar with and comfortable operating in, with levels of procedures and with levels of compliance and oversight, as well as working across multiple currencies and countries and time zones and so forth. So working in one time zone and one currency, I think, would be sort of a relief. So that's where I spent a lot of my time in my career. And I also taught a bit about financial management in a course that I was engaged in on experiential learning at BU. So I spent a lot of time teaching students about the importance of financial management and how foundational it is to any organization. So I think that's my introduction.
Thank you, Deidre. Let me begin with an open kind of question. What's your understanding of the town operating budget? And what do you perceive as the town's biggest challenges?
Well, I guess my understanding of the budget comes from certainly reviewing the warrant to the budget that was included, particularly this past year, as I've engaged more and more in town government. So looking at the different departments, components, of which, of course, the schools is a very significant piece of that. And I have not specifically done municipal finance before, but I actually did spend some time prior to the election and as part of 3 to 5 in getting a grasp of municipal finance and looking at, for example, training resources from the DLS, and getting a handle on sort of the lingo. So that was very helpful to me in understanding the warrant, the levy limits, the Proposition 2.5, all the implications of that, and how the town budget gets balanced. And of course, this year, as you well know, was a good year for the town in not having to use free cash to balance the budget and being able to instead use our free cash towards capital equipment, which is really the preferential use of that money. I think the individual department budgets are fairly straightforward in terms of, I'm used to looking at an aggregate budget that then is broken down into its component parts. And of course, the challenge for a small town like ours is keeping mindful of where the levy limit is as we approach it, and obviously not wanting to get there, as well as trying to reduce the tax burden on the town residents, as that is our primary source of income. The cherry sheet and the state aid seems to not be very significant in terms of offsetting expenses for our town. So figuring out how to increase our revenue and therefore reduce the tax burden on the residents is, of course, our greatest challenge. One that I think in the long term needs to be addressed through the master plan process, which is critically important at looking at how we manage the town going forward with an eye towards these financial issues and how we can be in better standing, particularly for our residents, to manage the affordability of staying in town, and how we can grow the revenue side, whether it's through business development and so forth. I think in the short term, we need to be cognizant of where and how we're searching for grants, and our ability to offset our expenses with bringing in additional grant revenue, of which there is a fair bit around right now post-COVID. And I think that that's really critical as well, particularly as a short-term strategy to create some offsets.
Thank you, Deidre. You've kind of touched on this, but let me throw it out as a question. How do you perceive the role and the responsibilities of FinCom within the overall operating operations?
Jim, can you hold on just 1 second? I
Yes,
think Gary has the same concern that I have, but can we take a quick pause? Go ahead, Gary.
yeah, I think I see Andrew Waylett here. Let's
Oh,
leave him out of this conversation until 6:30.
Yeah, Steve, can you ask?
Yep,
Mr.
I'll
Gaylor
ask
to-
him to leave. Yep.
Thank you.
oh, thank you.
We just want to make sure that neither candidate hears the other and has the opportunity to rebut or, take advantage of that. So thanks, Steve.
Okay.
And Jim, I think we can proceed.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Roger, Gary. So, Deidre?
Yes.
Okay.
Jim,
Oh,
maybe
sorry.
you should
Roll.
ask the
Yeah,
question
yeah.
again.
Ask
so
that
we-
question again.
I'll review the question one more time.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so how do you perceive the role and responsibilities of the so-called FinCom within the context of the overall government structure,
So the
town
role-
structure?
Sure. Thank you, Jim, for repeating that. So the role of FinCom is extremely important in the structure of town government because FinCom represents town meeting and essentially the residents of Wenham, and is basically the legislative oversight of the budget and the budget process and the safeguarding the fiscal responsibility of the town, how the money is managed, to really understand on behalf of our citizens and town meeting how the money is allocated, how it is spent. Is it being managed effectively, efficiently? Is it correct? Is it accurate? I think all of that is very important in the role of the FinCom. And in the Mass Municipal Association FinCom handbook, they actually use the words watchdog, that FinCom is the watchdog on behalf of the citizens. So I think the role is critically important, and it's important to bring that sort of lens of fiduciary responsibility, fiscal responsibility, oversight, working together, of course, with the executive branch to produce and manage the best possible budget on behalf of the citizens. And as we know, this is public money. It is tax money. It is state money. Sorry, my dog is running in. Sorry for the distraction. The perils of Zoom. So the role of FinCom is extremely important in the balance of powers, as we know, as our US government is structured, to have that balance of powers and oversight. And as well, I think in any financial system, that's what you want, is you want multiple touch points, multiple people, always reviewing budgets and expenditures consistently so that you can catch errors, so that you can find any issues in a timely fashion and resolve them, so that things are, particularly so that things are transparent. And I think part of the role of FinCom is to play that sort of middle person, middle role in translating and communicating the budget clearly and transparently to the citizenry. So it plays an extremely important role in town government.
Thank you, Deidre. As you know, we have a regional school system, a regional school committee. How do you see the challenges or the interface between the finance committee, town government with the school budget, school committee? How do you see that interfacing and interacting?
So I do think it's a complicated setup in that there are many people, constituents involved in a regional school district, with 2 towns, 2 select boards, 2 FinComs, a school committee, and of course, residents, families with kids in schools. There's a lot of stakeholders involved. I think it's critical that all of those groups have, work hard to foster communication and strong relationships so that the discussions can be cordial, can be civil, can be constructive. I think transparency is of the utmost importance. And I think, to his credit, my sense of this past year's budget process was that the new superintendent, Tracy, had a very strong handle, he and his team, on the finances, on the presentation, that it was done early, clearly. I know there were multiple public forums where people could hear about the school budget, ask questions, have their concerns addressed. I think that that's critical. And that, as I said, all of those groups are working in concert for the good of the town, not just the students, but the town, both towns as in their entirety, as everyone, of course, has an interest in the amount of money that is spent on the schools. And it is, as we know, fairly contentious, or can be very contentious, these budgets, and how the money is allocated. And it's not our role in the towns necessarily, or the FinCom, to control those budgets, but it is to understand them and help to ensure that transparency and sound financial management.
Thank you, Deidre. You've touched on this a little bit, but I'll ask it again more directly. Tell us a little bit more about your experience in working in groups or committees, and some of the challenges you've had in group or committee processes, and how you've managed those, particularly as a senior manager overseeing a department at BU.
Sure. Well, as I said, in the town level, my recent experience was with the Town Government Study Committee, and we certainly had some heated moments and interesting discussions, but I think we were all able to leave those meetings still feeling like we were heard and respected, and I think that's what's critical. And certainly throughout my entire career, our group was structured purposefully to be very team-based, very collaborative, and we were constantly working in groups and committees. And that's the kind of environment that we wanted to foster. In academia, you can be prone to having people siloed, doing their own work, and that we were trying to work contrary to that tendency and to really create groups, collaborations, so that ideas could be generated, creating buzz in a more interesting and exciting workplace. However, with that, of course, working with people is complicated. And in academia, there's quite a hierarchy with faculty, with staff, with administration. So you're constantly sort of butting up against those intrinsic hierarchies, which could make discussions very complicated. So we really consciously, deliberately tried to create an atmosphere where people felt they could be heard and that they could speak no matter what level they were speaking from, whether you were an assistant to someone or whether you were a senior professor who's been there for 30 years. You know, everyone had the right and the respect to be heard. And we tried to settle discussions as civilly as possible. Sometimes that means you may need to take a break. You may need to have sort of timeouts to have side conversations. And I certainly spent a lot of my time as a senior manager having one-on-one conversations in small groups, trying to bring people along, trying to understand people's positions so that we could bring people together and bridge those gaps and those disagreements, trying to sort of mend fences. I really think, you know, a lot of leadership and management comes down to communication and building relationships. I think if you don't have mutual respect, if you don't demonstrate that, it can't just be lip service, you know, it's not going to work. And the disagreements, people will sort of go to their tents and fester and be frustrated. And that's what you don't want, because you can't then move forward on the organizational objectives. So the idea is to help everyone feel valued, feel heard, consider all sides, and then work to bring people to, you know, a common, you know, not everyone's going to agree, but to get to a resolution and a way forward that people at least can live with and feel like their opinions were valued in the process.
Thank you, Deidre. Again, you've touched on this as well to a certain extent, but given your background and your experiences, how would you begin to address, as a member of FinCom, the strategic financial problems and solving those challenges? What would be some of your thoughts about how to move that whole agenda forward? You mentioned the master plan and some of those pieces of the puzzle, but just what strategically, I mean, what would be some of the strategic approaches or solutions that you might also bring to the table?
Well, I think the sort of viewpoint of looking at short and long-term visioning and goals, objectives, I do think, you know, because we are just embarking on a master plan process, that really has to be central for all the town boards and committees, in sort of, you know, in plugging into that process and really bringing all thoughts and minds to bear as we try to chart the course forward for the town. And I think FinCom is no exception to that, but FinCom absolutely has to be part of that conversation, because that, you know, that's the future. That's where we're going. And now is the time when we're going to be figuring that out. As we know, it hasn't been done for a very long time. So I think that makes it more critically important that we sort of get it right. So I think any opportunities for engagement, you know, basically in all directions, I think between FinCom and the select board, I think between FinCom and the planning board and the I'm not sure what they're calling it, the steering advisory master plan group, whatever it's going to be named. I think with FinCom and of course our new town administrator and his team, having constant and open dialogue, as we already talked about with the schools on that side, it's about building those relationships, having open dialogue. I think we need more of it this year as we are going into this master plan process, because it's really an important opportunity. And really, I would hope that, the strategic visioning sort of on the large scale is going to come from the consultant and the team and so forth, but again, plugging into that process without losing sight, of course, of our responsibilities of each individual board and committee and FinCom in going forward, and its customary responsibilities to the town and the oversight and so forth. I certainly have a lot of experience in academia and thinking about strategic growth and development, because we did it particularly in the country of Zambia, where we had our largest field presence. And so we were constantly having to think about the future and how would we grow? How would we grow in Zambia? Was it feasible, as well as in other countries? Where can we find alternative sources of revenue? That's, a very common problem in all sectors, particularly any nonprofit and municipal sectors. How would we diversify our funding sources? How would we diversify the actual work that we did in order to capture those funds? How would we think about it 5 years, 10 years down the road? How do you build the infrastructure to set yourselves up for success to achieve those goals? I think that's critically important. I would hope FinCom could participate in those discussions, as well as looking at town infrastructure and are we structured as best we can in terms of the financial management. Are there things that we could do differently, do better? I think in any organization, there's always room for growth and improvement. I think across the board, there's always places to make improvements. And I think this, again, because we're embarking on the master plan, it's sort of the right time to be looking at all of these issues across the board, positioning ourselves for the future.
Thanks, Deidre. We have about 6 minutes left, but the final question, not a question, well, it's kind of a question. The cycle of FinCom, the Finance Committee, is we begin to meet in September to begin to think about between September and December. What do we need to do? What information do we collect? When do we have our first budget information? And then from, the holidays come in December and plays a role in the meetings. But from January to town meeting, we're pretty active. Sometimes meeting weekly. The meetings last approximately, as chair, I've tried to keep them to about an hour and a half. They sometimes go a little bit longer. Would that time commitment be something that you could, at least at this point, be able to meet that time commitment between now and town meeting, for example?
Yes, I think so. And I would also admit to the fact that because I've become so sort of enamored of town government and municipal issues, I actually tend to watch a lot of meetings. So not always as they're happening, but I think, the Zoom recordings are priceless for citizens to be able to keep up with what's happening in town government. And I've found it fantastic. So I've actually spent quite a bit of time this past year, particularly this last winter as 3 to 5 was winding down. And I was sort of looking at where I might be able to play a role next. I started watching a lot of meetings of boards and committees. And of course, as part of the election process as well, I was paying attention. So I think I've already sort of spent a lot of time. So I have a sense of how often you met and watched a number of FinCom meetings and so forth. So yes, I feel pretty comfortable with that.
Thank you. Roger or Gary, questions that you have that didn't come up in the questions that I raised?
Yeah, I've got one, Deirdre. As you know, and as you alluded to, part of the FinCom's role is to present warrant articles at town meeting that, could cover the financial elements of the town budget. And in doing so, FinCom members have to be ready to answer resident questions on the articles that they are presenting. And typically the way Jim has done in the past, and I've continued to do as moderator, is that each of the members of the committee, are assigned certain articles and make the motions. How would you handle questions from the residents about a financial article that residents are seeing for the first time and may not have a complete understanding about what the article and the motion are presenting?
Sure. And this year I was sitting right up front, and I was paying close attention to the FinCom presentation, and I was very impressed with how well everyone did, to be honest. Obviously the goal is to try to have as much of that as possible worked out beforehand with the public sessions and creating opportunities for people to ask questions and so forth. But the likelihood is that there will still be questions and concerns in the moment at town meeting, and many people don't necessarily have time to be doing all of that legwork ahead of time, and we'll be seeing things for the first time at town meeting. And so I think that has to be expected. So I think it's important, as I saw the FinCom members do, to remain calm, to try to get the answers as readily as possible in the moment, to admit when you may not know the answer in the moment. I think that's also important to acknowledge, and to, agree to the appropriate follow-up if that's what's necessary. I've certainly had plenty of experiences with audiences that were upset, as I said, academia with a lot of hierarchy. Faculty tended to be very worked up over various issues that we had to deal with. So I am certainly accustomed to being in that seat and having to maintain calm and poise in the face of people being angry, frustrated, unfortunately at times hostile. We hope that it's not going to become personal. And Roger, you certainly handled some issues very well at town meeting. And I think that's required, is what's required is a cool head, calm response, so that you don't escalate the situation, and you try to, as best you can, give people the answers that they're looking for. And with that, try to give people comfort that you, particularly the committee, have done your due diligence, have really scrutinized and understood the budget, and feel that you can back it and stand behind it. And I do think that's critical as well.
Thank you, Deidre.
So I
Roger,
think,
Gary?
yeah, so I think we're wrapping up time, but I'd like to ask one question. Wenham is just now on the staff formulating long-term planning. How would you integrate that into the FinCom's annual budget cycle to look at the longer term?
Longer term planning for town hall, do you mean?
For the expenses for the town over the next 20 years?
I think that's great and really important. I think my background lends itself well to this because, I'm accustomed to budgeting for personnel. I'm accustomed to reviewing systems. I'm accustomed to reviewing different departments. As I mentioned, we had a full-scale operation in Zambia where we did capital purchases, where we had an extensive local labor force, where we had to worry about security costs. So all of the sort of elements are familiar to me, and incorporating all of that into your longer range planning is also something that I'm accustomed to, as I was mentioning, and looking in our case at the long-term growth of what was a research center and an academic department, and trying to structure that out. How would we be able to, like I said, build the infrastructure and afford what we think we need to grow the group, the personnel that needed to be added. In the town's case, of course, we're looking at a lot of services for residents, which is what's critically important to the townspeople is that can we maintain our services and even improve or add to while not creating additional undue burden on the taxpayers. So I think my experience can translate quite well into that arena.
Thank you.
Any further questions from the committee?
Good here.
I'm all set. Thank you, Deirdre.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deidre. Well, I believe will be after our second interview. We have two candidates. The committee will be deliberating and possibly making a decision tonight on the appointment. We haven't come to a full stop conclusion on that, but I think that's where we may go.
Great. Thank you
Th-
all
th-
very much.
Thanks for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's nice seeing you all, and I will take my leave. Good night.
Have a good night.
Okay, Steve, you let in Mr. Whalett?
All right, admitting him now.
Okay. Mr. Whalett,
Hi, everyone.
Good evening.
Hello.
hi, Mr. Whalett. Let me introduce the screening committee. And then we'll let you have opening remarks and tell us a little bit about yourself. Can I get a picture of you on the screen somehow? Steve, can you facilitate that?
When,
Of
when,
Mr.
Andrew, when Andrew's
Whalett?
speaking, he will come on
Yeah.
on the screen. It's your own settings if you want to change the view.
Okay. So, Mr. Whalett, the screening committee this evening is myself as a current chair of the finance committee, Mr. Gary Cheeseman, who is the chair of the select board, and Mr. Roger Smerridge, who is the town moderator. And that constitutes the committee to review the applicants for the so-called FinCom. We're very pleased that you've submitted your letter. So why don't you start? I have about 5 or 6 questions that I'll be asking you and then follow up from the committee. But why don't you start and give us a sense of your background and your interests and your involvement in the community to date? I know you've been here for a few years. Thank you.
It sounds great. Nice to meet everyone. By way of background, I'm a Massachusetts native. I grew up in Marshfield. Was active with a lot of different activities growing up, including the Boy Scouts. After college, I moved to South Boston. I was there for about 11 years, where I met my wife. And when COVID happened, we wanted to move outside of the city and spent a lot of time to really try to find a really good community that we really loved a lot, and Wenham was that perfect fit. So we've been here for about 2 years. On a professional note, I've started my career in internal audit, working for a financial services industry. There, I reviewed the design of control objectives and how they met different business needs. After about 7 years, I really decided that I could add a lot more value to organizations by, for lack of a better word, sitting on the other side of the table, working directly and more closely with business units. And I also went back to, at that time, I went back to grad school for an MBA at Boston University, concentration in finance, and then made a career transition into procurement. And in procurement, I was at the same organization for about a couple of years, and learned a lot about working with departments and procuring different types of goods and services. How to be very strategic to ensure that they're really getting good value and they're setting themselves up for success in the long term. I developed a further passion for purchasing, and I then went to the Federal Reserve, where I was there for a couple of years, building out their strategic sourcing function, and implemented their risk management program to oversee different vendors. After a couple of years, I then went to my current company at Arrow Street Capital, where I've been here for about 4 years. I'm currently a finance manager, and it's really more of an FP&A role, where I'm responsible for budgeting, forecasting, variance type of analysis, and then also building out their procurement function. And lastly, what really interests me to this role is because I have a little bit more free time now working in a hybrid type of nature, I wanted to get back to this community, and I felt that my unique skill set of budgeting and forecasting and being really strategic working with vendors to ensure that really getting the best value out of it just due to different cost constraints and really an inflation at a 41-year high, I felt like this is a really good opportunity for me to raise my hand.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Let me go through some questions that we have, and the committee will ask some further questions as if we don't touch on certain issues. So what's your understanding of the town operating budget? And what do you perceive as Wenham's biggest challenges?
Yeah. So my understanding regarding the budget process, it does happen once a year. I have reviewed the meeting minutes. I've watched some of the other different Zoom meeting sessions, and to me, it's really an advisory and collaborative type of experience where it's working with the different departments within Wenham, and ensuring that really being smart about procuring different types of services, and also from an advisory perspective, I think like a very important mission is ensuring that at the end of the day, when the budget and the spend is reported back to the different members of Wenham, really being a very diplomatic and transparent and objective with that information, really empowering them to really see the full picture to really make the best decision.
What do you think are our biggest challenges for this town? You've been here 2 years, but you're a Massachusetts native, so you're familiar with the Massachusetts larger issues, but a town of Wenham of 4,000 folks.
Yeah, so I did receive the budget in the mail, just with every other community member, and like one of the things that really jumped out to me is the property tax rate, and it seems like there's been a challenge the past couple of years to really not only like contain costs, but ensure that due to different types of expenditures related to the school, the library, other types of departments, that we're really like, instead of from a corporation perspective where you're trying to like maximize profit, from a community perspective, to me it's really about maintaining not only that revenue structure, but how to really get the best value out of the different types of expenses. But to me, the biggest issue really right now is I see revenue staying approximately about the same, about 22 million. I do see costs in the next couple of years continue to increase at a much larger rate than potentially 2.5% and with inflation being really high, I just think that we really need to be more strategic to ensure that we can still get the best value out of services.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate you looking into some of those issues in the past. How do you perceive the role and responsibilities? You've kind of touched on this of a finance committee, and throughout all cities and towns, they all have finance committees. What's your perception of that?
Yeah, to me, with the finance role, when you're looking at data and information and numbers, it's very important to be objective and to fairly present it. The way that I perceive a finance function in this case, from an advisory perspective, is we're really collecting and gathering information. To me, having the depth of experience is really critically important to ask the right question at the right time to really coach and support different departments and team members to really empower them to be the most successful.
And how do you see it? Maybe you've touched on this, but how do you see it integrating with other town operations, other town the other pieces of the town government system?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really important that after meeting with different departments and understanding like what their objectives are and what their requested spend is, being able to translate that and report it out in simple terms, so decision makers, if it's the select board or different committee members, really fairly and transparently have the right type of information. So it's really, to me, it's collecting and gathering that type of information and ensuring that it's fairly presented. it's complete, accurate, timely, just ensuring that the full picture is visible. And when options are presented, really it's not just like two easy options, but what are the two strategic options, if that actually has to come down to it, to really say we've done our due diligence, we've negotiated with a lot of different options. This is our best option one, this is our best option two. It's really up to the decision makers to then pick which one is best.
Thank you. So we're a regional school system, as you know. What do you see as the what do you see as the relationship between the school district with its school committee, and you understand school committees in Massachusetts and how they operate, with the town budget, and how that what's the communication? How do you see the communication working, decision-making relationships between the school and the town side of the budget?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the school committee is one of the most important stakeholders. I mean, their spend is about 60%. What's actually, from my perspective, unique and challenging is with it being a regional, school district. It's not only Wenham, it's Wenham and Hamilton. It's the school district as well. And to me, it's really important to nurture and develop and grow those relationships, and to really show passion and where those vested interests are. And to me, it's really critically important to focus on being objective and presenting the data, facts, and leaving to the side objective like opinions and beliefs, and really with that that mission to not really just do the status quo, but how can we continuously improve and understand like what their objectives are, and how can we help them be successful.
Thank you. It's a real challenge in the two communities, and it is our budget, our overall town budget is about, it's close, it's 54% of the total town budget operations. So it's a significant amount. You somewhat touched on this, Andrew. Could you tell us how you function within groups, with working committees, and when difficult challenges arise in work groups or work committees, how you've managed those, particularly now as you're you're a director within your existing company?
Yeah, with teams, with groups, with committees, I had a lot of experience, growing up in different types of activities, in sports, professionally, like when I first started internal audit, that working with a small team with different departments. It's really important to collaborate and know who your stakeholders are, from a team collaborating type of experience. It could be, I've had experience as an individual contributor, as the team leader. I've had a lot of different types of management training at organizations, and but most recently in finance and procurement. I'm actually responsible in my current company for two different types of committees. One is our budgeting committee, responsible for all of the addressable spend for the different departments at my firm, as well as a different committee, which is actually much more complex, building out our vendor management program, where it's not just from a self-serving interest of finance, but it's also working with different unique types of stakeholders in legal, compliance, IT security, and really putting together a really smart proposal to empower the departments to most be successful from a performance perspective, but also ensure that risk is manageable to an appropriate amount.
Could you give a little maybe in an overview, a scenario of a committee that you've chaired, and you've had a challenging situation with some of the members of the committee, and how did you manage that? Or please don't reveal anything, obviously, but just generally how you.
Yeah, I think a great example would be, I won't reveal which organization or department, but a good example would be in an annual budget process where we have a department that has a very large addressable spend, and the approach that I've historically taken is first approaching it from a bottom-up approach, meeting with different business units and putting together what's their business as usual, what are the new initiatives, what's the capex and opex, where are the fixed and variable different types of cost drivers. But at the end of the day, when you boil it all up, you then have the top-down approach, and it's really important to view from that perspective. And it's challenging too, because at the top-down approach, sometimes that number may be more than what is palatable. So then it's a matter of communicating down and prioritizing which has the most return on investment, which projects are we going to do, which projects do we have capacity for, which projects will add the most value, and versus which may not be as profitable, or it's not the right time to do right now. So then it's just a matter of going back and communicating that, as well as the other rationale, just to substantiate that accordingly.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. What do you think Wenham strategically has to do to meet the challenges of the future?
That's a really good question. From a finance perspective, I really would implore the not only different types of community members and departments possibly to conduct a survey. Like what would those interests possibly be? Like for example, with my wife and I, one of the things that drew us to the community, is the school system. The commutability into Boston still had that suburban type of feeling. Really good type of community. So that's just me from a personal level, but I think it's really important to survey different community members and understand where their vested interests are. But I think most importantly, from a finance perspective, it would be how do we correlate and how can we contribute to actually make that successful? So not really just what we're going to do this year and next year is all the needs, but strategically long term. And I like that the master plan that's in place. What is the long-term objective, and what are we doing today to gradually step to make our way there? Yeah,
the master plan is a critical piece for this community. We're just on the beginning steps, so it is a critical piece. So let me stop there. Just one other, somewhat of a concrete. The rhythm, if you will, of the finance committee is over the summer we reorganize. We begin to think about the planning going forward. But in September, October, we begin to have our first meetings, beginning to get a sense of how the fiscal year has moved forward, where our challenges in the existing year that might pinpoint or point to the next year. But that's up through about December, we have those meetings. But January to town meeting, which this year was on April 2, we meet pretty regularly. We have been meeting by Zoom. I don't know whether that will continue, whether there'll be in-person meetings, which we of course had. Do you meet in person in your company, by the way? I'm sorry, I'm diverting here, or is it all mostly Zoom?
No, it's definitely a valid question. Every company is unique. Typically in the tech space, we see more firms still being remote, but it's really important for those firms to attract and retain the top talent. And accordingly, I've seen more and more firms be flexible, and I've seen a happy medium to be a hybrid nature where there's really a combination based on departments where it's either a couple days on site or working remotely.
Yeah. So at any rate, where I was going with this is from January to town meeting is our more of an intense time. Meetings often for a period of time is probably weekly. The meetings, as chair, I've tried to kept the meetings to about an hour and a half. People have worked all day, but we have a lot of work to do in these meetings. But how does that fit with your current workload, family, life obligations, if you will, at this point in your life?
Yeah, it could definitely accommodate that. For me, my very busy time is September, October because of our fiscal year for 12/31. With that being said, can definitely meet weekly as needed. My typical day will end at about 6, so at any time after is fair game.
Okay, thank you. Gary, Roger, thoughts or questions?
Yeah, so Andrew, as Jim said, I'm the town moderator. So my primary job is to run and oversee town meeting. And part of the FinCom's role is to present the financial warrant articles at town meeting. And along with that, is to answer resident questions on those articles. And the way traditionally it's done in Wenham is that each member of the FinCom is assigned a couple of the articles to present and be the primary first responder on any questions. How would you handle questions on financial articles from residents who may be, seeing the information and considering the issues for the first time there at the floor of town meeting?
Yep, that's an excellent question. To me, it really boils down to ensuring that when you're presenting information, you're really presenting it from an approach that a lot of people can understand and easily comprehend to really make a very important decision. By fairly presenting the information, we really want to ensure that if someone is seeing this for the first time, we're being very slow and concise and deliberate with the message on how it is portrayed. Different organizations have had a lot of different types of presentation experiences with our budget, with our CEO, implementing things to our board of directors, and then to answer your question, to me it's really important to provide a brief overview of what it is that's being proposed, as well as the rationale behind that, and then also from a quantitative and qualitative perspective, really providing the right details. So anyone who has a vested interest that would be passionate to learn a little bit further about it, the overall objective would be to give them that right information at the right time.
And just to follow up on that, if on the floor of town meeting someone asked you a question about an article that you didn't have the information right at the top of your hand, what would you do?
Well, first, if I didn't know it immediately, I would defer to another committee member if they had the answer. And if the answer was easily accessible, I would acknowledge that I don't know the answer, and I would look into it.
Thank you.
Gary?
Let me jump in here with one then. The town of Wenham is just getting into long-range planning. It's been missing in the past. How would you integrate long-range planning into the annual budget cycle?
Yeah, that's a good question. To me, with long range planning, in my experience working with rolling budgets, is it's really important to as part of the communication with the different departments to understand not only what their objectives are today, but what are the objectives in the long term, depending on what the forecast or horizon is, if it's 5 or 10 years. For me, when building it out, there's a couple. Sometimes it's not always an exact science, so it is occasionally, from my perspective, okay to provide like an estimate of like what you know, but also what you don't know, and acknowledge that you don't know it, and it is forecast, and it can change depending on other types of variables. From my perspective of building it out, there's different types of fixed costs which are not movable. Then there's variable costs, but it's really important to understand like where the levers are and where you can push and pull in order to put together that forecast. And just in my experience of putting it out, the vision is very clear for next year. And then the further you look out in the horizon, the greater it gets, because the volatility can increase just because it's further out and things can change.
Thank you.
Andrew, you mentioned during one of your responses to Jim's question, the budget committee at your current employer. Again, without getting into any specifics or confidential information, can you just describe that committee a little bit more and the work that you in particular do on that committee?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do want to clarify that point, that it's not the entire budget committee, but it's the budget committee specific just for addressable vendor spend. So what that entails is early communication with the different department heads of kicking off the project initiative and identifying what the deadline date is, and working backwards just to ensure that everyone has sufficient time and capacity to really empower them to be successful. And then part of that is working with different, finance team members to really, ensure that they have the right information data to be successful. At the organization that I'm, currently at, a method that we use is that we take a look at what we spent last year, and then we then don't just roll it forward as is or apply a 2-3% number on it. Really, line by line item, we're going through in detail and saying, does this make sense? Are we, is this, we're still getting good value out of it? Are we expecting changes to different growth numbers? Importantly, instead of just looking at it from a dollar perspective, it's really critical to get into the details by looking at what are the rate costs. Are the vendors really providing us really good value? Do we need to go out to bid for an RFP or look at different solutions, and just ensuring that we have like the right information and foresight to really put that together. And then it's just a matter of once that kicks off, just marching forwards to do the different steps of for me, it's business as usual, and then the new initiatives, and everything almost comes together at the same time. But it's also critically important to save time at the end, just because there's a reconciliation process that's involved to ensure if anything needs to change, it's being changed accordingly.
And how many people are on that committee?
So at my current company, team members, it's 3 other people, but really with that committee, it's led by the CEO and CFO, and then it's really the different department heads that we'll work directly with.
And how do you, this kind of ties back into a question that Jim asked, but how do you deal with tension or disagreement in that committee setting, working with people who maybe have a different viewpoint, and maybe you're on, for lack of a better term, the losing side of a decision, but you need to continue working with those other committee members going forward. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so what's nice is, at least from my perspective in finance, there's no win or lose. It's really, this is the information, this is the data, and if the business case, in my experience, is strong enough, it's essentially presented to the decision makers of the organization is this a strategic investment? Is this worth a lot of additional cost? Would this help us obtain additional revenue, or help us be more lean and efficient and free up capacity to do other strategic initiatives? It's just a matter of taking what the objective is and translating that into quantitative and qualitative terms, and having a strong enough business case just to substantiate why this is really important to pursue further.
Thank you.
And Andrew, I do have one further question. How do you see the mission of town government, public service, public dollars in relationship to private finance, wealth development kind of company? How do you see those two?
Yeah. I've been in the financial services industry my entire career, and the way I historically have looking at that is obviously you have your revenue and expenses, and you're trying to really ensure that you're getting the best value as possible out of the expenses. And the reason for that is because you want to attract and retain the right types of clients, and ensure that you're producing alpha, a significant return on the investments over the other benchmark, ensuring that your different management fees are really effectively appropriate, and you're not charging too much where you would lose clients in in a government sense. Possibly different people in the town might say that expenses are too much, we might move elsewhere. So it's finding that right mix to really ensure that you're in a private sense you're getting the right types of customers, and the customers will continue to grow, and translate that back from to a government and a community perspective. That my personal belief is while the costs typically are variable, or they're nominally increasing every year, it's really more of how do we get more bang for our buck? How do we get more value out of the spend? How can we make the community members more happy? How can we invest in different initiatives? And for me, the school is the largest one to really ensure that we're really attracting the right type of community members to continue to make everyone happy.
Thank you, Andrew. Any further questions from Gary or Roger?
Good here.
Any?
Nothing further from me, Jim.
Thank you very much. Andrew, do you have any final closing remarks that you would like to make?
Uh, I would say, just in, closing, this is my first time, interviewing, and, just was really a big fan of the, like the transparency and how like the meeting minutes are posted and the different YouTube videos, and the information is easily accessible. So, in summary, I, really like the transparency of that information. And then just in closing remarks, just want to say, thank you to everyone for considering me for this opportunity.
Thank you very much for your time, and we appreciate your interest in being here as a fairly new resident in town government.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Bye.
Okay. So Steve, we're still recording,
That's correct.
and two candidates are no longer with us. Is that correct? Or is it's an
I mean-
open meeting? I mean, they can be, I believe.
Yeah, I don't think you can disallow anyone. to be-
No, you can't disallow anybody, right?
No, I don't see them in
Oh,
the,
okay.
in the
that-
cap, but
That's fine. I just wanted to clarify that. So the next step in the process, Gary, Roger, is discussion of the candidate's strengths or weaknesses or decisions to go forward in nominating a candidate.
You want to go first, Roger?
So I think, both candidates bring various skills that could be of use to the FinCom and to the town. I think one has a demonstrated professional career in finance, and seems to have a good amount of operational experience dealing with budgeting issues, which is obviously one of the key components to being a member of the FinCom. But at the same time, it seems to not have as much experience, knowledge with the town and town government. Another candidate, has a demonstrated, I think, track record of being involved in the town government, and desires to continue that and even further it, but has more of an applied financial experience rather than something's in the typical financial services pipeline. So those are sort of my initial thoughts.
Well, Gary, you want to go?
Sure. I think both candidates are well qualified, brought good resumes, and but I think I found Andrew. I was most pleased to see that he talked about data and facts and the budget process being the driving force rather than opinions. He seemed to have great knowledge on processes within the budgeting and with dealing with the departments and so forth, and clearly has the financial background. Deidre, yes, has participated in the past in the town activities and government, but I found Andrew perhaps more what I would say in line with the FinCom talents.
Okay. We have two excellent candidates, excellent backgrounds, different views, I guess, or different experiences in finance. And I think the applied both have budgeting clearly, and actually Deidre Parati, I think, has extensive budgeting responsibilities and experience, and the applied part of that I think is important. As I look back on my experience on FinCom, I think the other piece of it for me is that Andrew is a strong candidate. Deidre has experiences that I think she'll bring to the table that are very positive for the town of Wenham. And her background with the personnel policies that she developed, the work on the Town Government Study Committee, I thought was a hard job, but done with a lot of respect and a lot of hard work. And her budgeting and 20 years of BU working with a variety of groups and people with a lot of different agendas, I'm sure, I think speaks well to her background and how she would manage and work on the Finance Committee.
So I guess the question, unless we want to do further discussion at this point after we've kind of offered our initial thoughts, is do we take a straw poll and see if there is, well, first of all, I guess the question is, do the committee members feel like they need more time to deliberate over the two candidates and what we've heard tonight?
No, I think, both gave great presentations. We've had a look at the resumes and so forth, and we're familiar with the work on the FinCom. So I think, more time is perhaps not necessary. We have all the facts we have available.
Yeah, I agree
I
with
would-
that, Gary.
I would concur as well. I mean, we have the material up front and up hand resumes from both of them and very good presentations from both. So, yes, I would concur. Let's try a straw poll, if you will, Roger, and see where we are.
My choice would be Deirdre. I think, Andrew has a lot of the raw skills and concepts. And Gary, exactly what you said, the data-driven approach to budgeting is very, very important. And I think with a little bit more time in the community, learning more about how the town government operates and the different branches operate and how the town and school committee governments interact, Andrew will be a very, very good contributor to our town government down the road. And I encourage him to certainly seek out, opportunities to get involved and learn more about our town and where it's going. But I think Deirdre, has some very strong applied budgeting experience that Jim mentioned, and has that knowledge already of what the town is looking for, where we're trying to go, and could apply her experience from day one on the FinCom, whereas I think Andrew might have a little bit more of a learning curve. So for those reasons, I would choose Deirdre.
Gary, you want to go or you want me to?
I'll go if you want.
straw vote?
Yeah, so I think at this point, I would go with Andrew based on, what I've seen internal to town government over the last 2 years, that we need a professionalization and people that have the technical understanding of large issues that, for a long time, we've been stuck in an annual budget cycle, but have not looked forward and not expand our horizons to big issues. And certainly, I think Andrew, has a much broader understanding of finance. He spoke to the challenges of inflation and budget over the next 2 years. And as I said before, I found Deirdre is has great resume, but we spent a lot of time on generalities, whereas I thought Andrew, reflected a very technically competent and approach to how to reach objectives, how to set up budgeting and the processes. So I'm preferring Andrew at this point. Jim?
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Gary. I'm going to support Deirdre Parati. I think she brings to the table both management, budgetary, and work skills that would be supportive not only to FinCom, but to the town of Wenham. And I think she's demonstrated that already in her experiences. I think she has a good sense of the challenges we face. I think she has a good sense of the people and the processes that need to occur. And I think she also has a very good budget background and technically sound budget background as well, and has been following for the past year FinCom and the FinCom budget. So she's going to enter into this, I think, with a very sound basis of which to contribute to the Finance Committee. So my vote is for Ms. Parati.
Do we want to have further discussion, or do we want to consider a formal motion?
I think it's quite clear, so why don't we just move forward with the formal motion?
Okay. I, Roger Smerridge, move that the Finance Appointing Committee appoint Deirdre Parati to the Finance and Advisory Committee for a 3-year term, beginning July 1, 2022, and ending June 30, 2025.
I second the motion.
Any further discussion?
And from here.
I just want to say again, both candidates were very strong, and regardless of the way the motion goes, I encourage whomever is not appointed to continue to try to, develop more experience working in town and more involvement. We have plenty of open boards and committee positions, so there's lots of opportunity to do that. So unless anyone has any other comments,
No, we're good.
move to a roll call vote. Jim,
I supporting Deidre.
Gary,
No,
and Roger, aye. So the motion passes 2-1.
Okay, thank you very much, Gary. Thank you very much, Roger.
yes,
Steve, last year, I was, the next morning, I was in touch. We had 3 candidates last year to let them know the outcome of this. Is this something that you want to come from your office or the clerk's office? How have you managed this in the past? Just to be clear about it.
It's been a mix. I guess I'm certainly willing to, whatever you guys have done in the past, I'm certainly willing to just continue past practice.
Okay,
so I think the contact information is with Michelle and Steve. So Steve, you want to just
Yeah,
give them a
that's-
call? I think might as well do it now if
Okay.
you have a few more minutes, and then remind them that they have to appear before the town clerk for their swearing in, and so
Right. right.
that'll complete the process.
And
All right.
Trudy will be informed. She's on vacation, I understand. Is that right?
Yes, but
Yeah.
the assistant should be in there tomorrow, right, Steve?
Yeah,
Yeah, I believe so. I know Trudy's had some scheduling issues, but I believe there is some coverage in there tomorrow.
okay.
Well, you got some time anyhow, because your next meeting isn't until when, Jim?
Our next FinCom meeting,
Yes.
I don't have one scheduled.
So
So I was
next week's
waiting.
good enough then, right? If there's nobody. at the town clerk
Yeah, no,
meeting.
I was waiting for this meeting to be, then I have to work with David Reed on the reorganization of the committee.
Right.
So that'll be over the next, probably week plus, Gary. Yeah.
All right.
So I think the only thing left for this committee to do is we have 2 sets of meeting minutes, and then we'll
Oh,
have
yeah.
a third after tonight. Should we schedule a very short
Yes.
meeting to get those minutes approved?
Yeah. Thank you, Roger, for raising that. Yeah.
I will be flexible as best as my schedule allows.
So Roger, why don't you go ahead and say what's best time for you?
Well, let's give Catherine a couple of days to get the minutes together and maybe look at the week of June 27th.
Yep. I could do the 30th easily
Yeah,
during the day or in the early evening.
I could do any time on the 30th. I can, if we're just,
Okay.
doing 5 minutes to approve
It's
the
the-
meeting minutes, I can do it.
Right.
anytime.
So let's
Okay.
check with Catherine then. Catherine, what's your schedule on the 30th look like?
At this point, we're open. I certainly don't need that long to wrap up these minutes, so please schedule accordingly to your schedules.
Right. So is 9 in the morning, good for you, Catherine?
It can be.
Is that,
Yep.
Yeah,
good?
I can do
I can
nine,
do
nine
it.
on the 30th, yep.
All right, so Steve, you want to put that on the calendar then? So 9 AM on the 30th, just a quick meeting to approve minutes.
We'll do
All right.
that now.
All right,
I think that's everything on our agenda for the evening. So unless there's any other comments, questions, we can have a motion to adjourn. Anything else, guys?
No,
we're finished.
All
other
right.
than,
Thank you.
thank you for everyone's thoughts and work on this. It's good to see good candidates coming forward
Yes.
Yep.
for now, and for the future.
Well, I'll move to adjourn.
So yep,
Yeah, I'll
Nice.
second that. Roger will second that.
yep,
And we'll go to a roll call. Jim,
yes, yep.
Gary,
Yes.
Rogers, yes.
All right, thank you.
We're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.